This isn't just how to replace the tip of your cue, this is how to shape it so it's ready to play with straight away afterwards. This is Break From Life. Welcome back, and if this is your first time watching one of our videos, then it's fantastic to have you here. There are an awful lot of players out there who will only ever get their tips put on professionally. But I found there's no difference between this and the ones I put on myself, and since I've had 100 breaks with the tips I put on the cue myself, here's how you can save a bit of money by doing it on your own. I noticed this tip started playing unusually and found what was wrong with it was half the ferrule had actually gone through the bottom of the tip. The best way to take it off is with a knife like this. If you're worried about cutting your hand in any way, then just put a cloth around your hand so the knife can't cut it. Once you've removed the tip, you want to get rid of any remnants of the tip or glue that was used to put it on previously. When you're doing this, you're going to be scraping off bits of wood and ferrule from the top of your cue. So you want to make sure you're keeping that surface as flat as possible so the tip doesn't wobble when you stick it on. You can do this best by scraping from 3/4 of the way across to the edge, and then once you've done this, check the tip fits on the cue nice and flat. I'm using cue sole tips, which are layered tips, and if you want to know how to buy them, there's a link to them in the description. With any tips you're sticking on, I'd recommend roughing up the bottom surface so it sticks easier to the cue. But with cue sole tips, there's a painted surface that you have to actually sand off before you can stick it on, and you need to be very careful you don't round this surface either. Then just check that the tip sits nice and flat on the top of your cue, and if it does, then it's ready to glue it on. Now I'd recommend using super glue, and if possible industrial strength super glue. Unfortunately I didn't have any available, so I'm just using regular, which isn't quite as good because it's a lot better to get it to stick quicker. Make sure you stick it on in the right place first time and then hold it in place for a few seconds with your fingers and then start putting pressure on it. It's at this stage I usually push the tip into a solid surface like this table, for example, to make sure the glue fully bonds between the cue and the tip. I usually keep pressure on it like this for 5 to 10 minutes, and if possible leave it for a few hours before moving on to the next stage and shaping the tip. Now as I've got a cue sole tip, I'm going to use one of these handy pencil sharpener looking things to help me cut it down. Most of you, if you're using a regular sort of tip, you'll have the right size for the cue already, but cue sole only comes, I think this is 14mm, so you've got to really cut it down, and you can't actually do this with most types of tip. So the big pencil sharpener eventually gets there. It takes about 10 minutes, but if I was to sand this all down, this would probably take me 2 to 3 hours. So in doing it like this, I get it done a lot quicker. A quick tip is to go round the top of it when you're done at an angle, so this helps to form a nice dome that you want on top of the tip. Unfortunately you can't do it all the way, but you can start to form the dome, and this will help you save a bit of time later when you're sanding it down like this. Now ideally you want to use a file, but for some reason I've lost mine, so I've just got a bit of sandpaper with a block of wood, and this almost works just as well. You want to try to always sand downwards so you're not sanding upwards and pulling the tip off. Now I notice a lot of players out there go for quite a rounded tip. Now this does actually allow you to grip the cue ball a little bit better, but I always go for a flatter tip because this makes it easier to strike the cue ball in the centre more consistently. You'll notice when I'm finished there's a very large amount of tip protruding from my cue. Now I don't actually mind this, and with a lot of other types of tips this wouldn't work, but the cue sole tips has got such a solid structure that you can actually get away with this. If you're using one of these tips and you want a more traditional length of tip, you're just going to simply have to sand it down more. This was my first go with a tip, and the great thing about cue sole tips is that they're playable within a few shots. You get that feel automatically, where with a lot of tips they feel soft and spongy to start off with. If at this stage you get the feeling of it just being a little bit loose, I'd suggest gluing a little tiny bit round the bottom of the tip before taking it off again. I had about 10 frames with somebody the next day using this tip, and I had a couple of 70 breaks, and I already feel very happy with it. And if you want to see one of my old videos where I review the QSOL tips, then try this video. Or if you want to see 5 tips on snooker, then try our video Snooker Tips. And remember, don't just watch, play, and make the commitment to becoming a better player by subscribing to the channel and visit the website. See you later.